Kajal. Maha. Exactly. Kajal mi here fidi and tentai ahman. I'm saying we will meet them. It's intizar and you have that. So what page did you all get to?
We ended last time getting ready to start with chapter 4.
So everybody got through chapter 3?
No, the last class that we had.
No, but I said, remember we said at the end, if everybody can read through to the end of chapter 3. So I was
sorry.
asking, did everybody get a chance to do that?
No, I didn't read through the end of it. I didn't. I don't know about Giddy. God. Jiddy.
I remember one of our Ethiopian sisters we were together in Guinea, and I said Jedi, I said, oh Jedi. Jedi, that movie talking about.
Okay. There was a discussion on our BB Tumi Casa over the past couple of days, actually that started, about what was Israel in relation to African people, like Israel. And it came up because I was in a meeting where, you know, people who have been exposed to the Bible, they try to find themselves in it. And then they were talking about how black people are the original Israelites and so forth and so on. And of course, they're basing it on biblical stuff as opposed to historical stuff. So in the thread, we were talking about, or dealing with information of the very first time anything called Israel was mentioned anywhere on the planet Earth. And that was the stela of Meron Ptah. Now, Meron Ptah, remember a few classes ago, for those who were here, that was a bust in the Cairo Museum that we looked at. And he's the one who defeated the Sea Peoples. And in his victory stela, he talks about how all of the enemies of Kemet, which are the enemies of black people, had been defeated. And Israel is listed as one of these enemies of Kemet, southwestern Eurasian, you know, along with a few others. So I wanted us to look at that very briefly, and then we go into the actual text for today.
And the name of Israel at that time?
This is Israel. This is how it's listed, and that's actually what we're going to go into.
Oh.
So, let's come here. Actually, let me see if I can get a pointer.
Does this turn on an axis or no? It just is fixed?
It's fixed, but I just tried to do something slightly.
Okay.
But can you see this one?
So
this is the double flowering wreaths. What sound value does this have? You remember?
I know it means by, like by so-and-so or something like that, right?
Not here. Here's just the phonetic value.
Oh, okay.
Right.
No, I
flower and read. Actually, before we get to that, let's go to the top because I'll give you the context in which we were even discussing it.
Okay.
So in it, it was a very interesting discussion because a few people weighed in. So this is the Egyptian pharaoh Merenptah, and this is 1213 to 1203 BCE. Provides the earliest non-biblical reference to ancient Israel. And ancient is really a misnomer if that word is supposed to actually mean anything. So again, this is the earliest non-biblical reference to ancient Israel, keeping in mind that the Bible was written long after this. So in a short poem appended to a much longer prose account of his self-proclaimed victory over the Libyans and their allies, the Sea Peoples, the victory stela, now usually known as the Israel stela, was erected in 1209 in Merenptah's funerary temple at Thebes. The relevant part of the victory ode reads, "The princes are prostrate, saying shalom." So the princes are prostrate, saying shalom, which is peace. Not one is raising his head among the 9 bowls. Now that Libya, Tehenu, has come to ruin, Hatti is pacified. The Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Yanoam is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste and his seed is not. Huru is become a widow because of Egypt, or Kemet as it would read in the original text. So again, this is the very first time that there was anything called Israel on the face of the planet Earth. So even when we say this is the ahistorical part of it, if someone says we come from Israel, what were we doing before the very first time that there was anything called Israel on the face of the planet? Because this is now going towards the end of black civilization, right? So you have the foundation of Kemet by very modest accounts around 3,200, between 3,200 and 3,400 BCE. So you have 2,000 years of recorded history before the first thing of anything called Israel. So you're saying that this is where we came from, but what was going on before then, especially given that Kemet means land of the black people, all right? And then also to put it into context, you had the Hyksos who invaded Kemet.
Those are the Asians.
Yes. And then they were driven out from Kemet. So this is the foundation of the dynasty. This is Amos, right? And then you have other major rulers, such as Jehotimes, who they call Tutmos III, who was able to, take the war to them. You have Ramesses II, another major ruler, and then after Ramesses II, you have Merenptah, right? So you have all this history going on, and one thing that you find is that throughout the annals, Kemet was not interested in Southwestern Asia, right? It was always about bringing in more black people, expanding the land of the blacks. So you have all these stela that say, my land, my boundary stone is further south than my father's, all this type of thing. But once the Hyksos came in, now it's time to take the war to them. But when you finally get any type of mention of something called Israel, and many scholars are of the opinion that Israel is the remnants of the Hyksos who were driven out, that all of these Southwestern Asians are part of that group that was driven out. So even when you talk about an Exodus story, if there's any validity to it, it's not that they were enslaved or anything like that. It's that they came as invaders and were driven out righteously in the very first African War of Liberation against these Eurasians. So it continued, the leading adversaries of the Egyptians, 3 city-states or kingdoms designated by their capitals, Ashkelon, Gezer, and Yanoam, and the people known as Israel. And then it goes further, into this, and this is from Carol Redmount, Bitter Lives, Israel in and out of Egypt, right? So here, here's somebody saying he's trying to talk sense to somebody who calls himself an Israelite,
Yeah, Hebrew Israelite.
right? And then it came up, you know, this idea about parting of sea, parting of water. And the very first context of that is also plagiarism, because it's in the story about the golden lotus, which is here. So Sennacherib, father of the Pharaoh Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, reigned over a contented and peaceful Egypt. He had no foreign wars and few troubles at home, so forth and so on. But here, the context is he says, devise something that will fill my heart with pleasure. He's bored, right? Everything is cool, but you know, even that can get a bit monotonous. So he calls one of his main advisors and says, what can I do to basically perk myself up? And he says, you know, we can order out the royal boat, right? And then have all these ladies, women rowing, and you'll see the sweet birds and the sweet fields and green grass. All of that will basically perk you up. Now, as the ladies are rowing, one of them loses her golden lotus, right? So the girl, where are we? The girl who was using it and swept the golden lotus she wore on the fillet that she held back her hair into the water where it sank out of sight. So now she's no longer rowing, and she let out a little cry, and then Sennacherib says, you know, what caused you, why did you cease to row? She says, oh, my golden lotus fell into the water. So he's saying, row on as before, I will give you another. She continued to weep, saying, I want my own, I don't want any other. And then he calls Zazamank in order to basically part the waters, right? So the lake parted as if a piece had been cut out of it with a great sword. This is the very first time there's any mention of parting of waters. So again, you have straight 50% plagiarism, 50% lies in terms of the Bible. So even with to get the concept, they stole that concept from this specific story. So the lake parted, he stood on the stern of the royal boat and began to chant great spells and words of power. And presently he held out his wand over the water. The lake parted as if a piece had been cut out of it with a great sword. The lake here was 20 feet deep, and the piece of water that the magician moved rose up and set itself upon the surface of the lake, so that there was a cliff on the water on that side 40 feet high. So this side is 20 feet, he's basically like, split it up, right?
Describe it in detail.
Right. Now the royal boat slid gently into the great cleft in the lake until it rested on the bottom. On the side towards the 40-foot cliff of water, there was a great open space where the bottom of the lake lay uncovered.
It's firm and as dry as the land itself.
Exactly. With a cry of joy, the maiden who had lost it sprang over the side onto the firm ground, picked it up, and set it once more in her hair. Nice, thank you. Then she climbed swiftly back into the royal boat and took the steering oar into her hands once more. So as the monk slowly lowered his rod, and the royal boat slid up the side of the water until it was level with the surface once more. Then at another word of power, this is, if you read Middle Lecture by Jacob Carruthers, he talks about the power of words in the worldview context. And as if drawn by the magician's rod, the great piece of water slid back into place, and the evening breeze rippled the still surface of the lake as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But the heart of Pharaoh Sennacherib rejoiced and was filled with wonder. And he cried, Zazamank, my brother, you are the greatest and wisest of magicians. You have showed me wonders and delights this day, and your reward shall be all that you desire, and a place next to my own in Egypt, or Kemet. They hate saying Kemet, because once they say Kemet, you have to ask, well, what does Kemet mean? So she sang sweetly a love song. She stands upon the further side between the flows of Nile, and it goes on. So you can read that. All this is in the same, text or same thread here on a Bibi Tumikasa. So then a brother came in. He says, "To me, it looked like Jezreel, not Israel. Do you know when and where might a second mentioning of Israel be?" Now he's saying that it looks like Jezreel, but he doesn't know how to read or write Medu-Neter, which is why he's saying that. Because if you look at the parts of it, this is a transliteration. I-S-R-E-A-R.
Okay.
Right? And it's very similar to like in Asante. The Asantes are world renowned for not being able to pronounce the R's and L's correctly.
Okay.
So instead of saying brown bread, they say blanc bled. Blah. So the mixing of the R, but you know this is E.
E.
This is what?
Let me see, that one is S.
Exactly. So
S.
East. So that's where we also call East. Then this one?
R.
E.
Exactly.
E.
E.
E again.
E.
A. Ah.
Ah. Right.
R again.
Right. And then this is a stroke determinative.
Determinative.
This is a determinative to let you know you're talking about someone foreign. It's a throw stick.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
And then this is man and woman. And then you know it's talking about a plural group of foreigners.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So when he said this, people like to pretend. But when he said, oh, to me it looked like Jezreel, apparently he got that from something, but not from actually looking at the text, and not Israel.
It can't be Jezreel.
It can't be. There's no, but the thing is,
But there's not a J? Is there even a J in the?
this is the thing, when you have to know a little bit about linguistics, because in Nordic languages and in the International Phonetic Alphabet, they use this as a representative of an E sound.
E.
E, right? So it's like it's also in, what is it? I want to say Spanish, they do a J sound.
H.
Right?
J sound has
Right,
H.
right. So you have different systems of orthography, but you have to know what the sound value is tied to that particular orthography. So here is Gardner's transcription, and here you see the E is here, but Allen is more in line with the International Phonetic Alphabet. So it's still the same E sound, but he's transcribing it as this, which is still E, right? So I said, note that to represent this E with E follows the IPA. Both of them mean the same sound. It's just different methods of transcription for that sound E, which in turn follows a practice in Nordic languages where what is referenced or referred to as a long E sound in English is represented by this, which is E. And it's there at the museum in Cairo, and the only known mention in ancient Egypt of anything called in Israel. This is my own picture of when I went to Kemet, and it's down here. Now there's a case that has been made for a fragmentary pedestal stolen and taken to Berlin as an earlier mention of Israel, but it's more disputed, as you will see. So here, this has E, this is A, it's the same vulture, right? But it's cut off. You see the beak here, and then the leg here, and that's it. And you have to intuit that this is the vulture. This here is Sha. So a lotus pool is Sha. Then this is E, this is So this is a phonetic complement of this one here. So here is E and then A, which we are intuiting, that's why it's here in the square brackets.
Sure.
Then Sh, this is Sh, A, ear, so Ishair, right? And using Allen's method, you would do the same E sound, but you are represented by this, right? Which in English we would call a J, but in the Nordic languages, again, this is an E. Sounds exact same thing, just different ways of transcribing it. But you see that this one is much closer to what we would pronounce today as Israel. So Israel. And this one is Iyashire, right? But anyway, that's the discussion up to here. But it's a good discussion because it brings out a lot, especially for people who say, oh, we're from Israel, we're Israel, whatever. And then you have to ask yourself just what the topic of this thread is. What was Israel in relation to the land of black people? When was the first time it was ever mentioned? And then who were they? These are the enemies of black people. These southwestern Eurasians were the enemies of black people. And that's why it goes into how Kemet has made them, let's come back up, wasted and bare of seed.
So then how does this translate for the Ethiopians who essentially say that they are, in fact, the true Israelites or the true Hebrewites?
Right.
How does that plug
The falasha.
Ethiopia? I
Yeah,
don't know.
they're called, that's what they're called, the falasha, Jews. So it ties in because whatever we're dealing with, first Ethiopia, we talk about Ethiopia in terms of the place that wasn't colonized. However, if you actually understand it in terms of what were you doing before so-called Judaism? What were you doing before so-called Christianity? Then you come to that's actually the first place that was colonized. It was colonized for the longest time. So you have to get to, all right, if you are into Judaism, or if you're into Christianity, what were you doing before that? The end of whatever you were doing before that is the end of your independence in that area in terms of spirituality, right? So Judaism, what we find in it is 50% plagiarism, 50% lies. Old Testament. New Testament, same thing, 50% plagiarism, 50% lies. So all of the ideas, whether we're talking about 10 Commandments, is coming from 42 principles of Ma'at. If we're talking about Holy Trinity, either testament you want to go to, all the major concepts, salvation, all these are found in the ancient texts that predate anything called Judaism, predate anything called Christianity. So the link is going to, all right, you can say, all right, you were the first Jews or whatever. What were you doing before Judaism? Because you don't get older than the pyramid text in terms of a compilation of concepts of spirituality. On the entire planet, you don't get older than that, right?
Even in Tia, Ethiopia, Tiya, Asher Kwesi was talking about some of the earliest known writings of what he referred to as astral theology, and none of that had any Judaism, anything.
That's all.
This is just pure ancient.
So this is where we're coming into who are the Hebrews, who are the Jews, who are the Israelis, who is Israel here. That what you find is that there was a group called the Hyksos who set up at Utweret, what they call Avaris, and eventually took over much of Lower Kemet, right, until they were finally expelled by Africans coming back up from the south. Anytime Kemet was in danger, you had Africans coming up from the south to drive away these Eurasians. They were very clear on who they were, very clear on who their enemies were. So with this point, when we're talking about all these groups that came out, you're talking about remnants of these Hyksos. And we were even talking about this, I think we had another thread on this, but we'll come into it. Here we talk about Yamos. That's often in English is called Amos, the first ruler of the dynasty that drove out the Hyksos. So what is the Yah that his name starts with? Yah. Let's go to the dictionary. The dictionary.
The Y, right? The letter.
It'll be the E, the single flowering reed.
Oh, the single reed. Okay.
Which is Iyah.
Alphabet is.
Here we go. E, A. Make it bigger. Let me see if I can put it into JSearch so you can see what the missing determinative glyph is. It should be the crescent moon. Now, when we say Rameses, we looked at that before about a week or two ago. What is the Meses? Do we remember that? Meses.
When coming to the Rameses, going to Cheikh Anta Diop, he said Ra means the sun, Meses that means the sun.
Right.
He said in there is a language you speak in Senegal, they call it Sere. So if you go to Sere, the Moses means the son of.
Right. So literally, and we can show it here, when you're talking about birth, let's do it with 2 and see if we get it. You'll see this. Miss as child, Missi, bear or give birth, Missut as birth. So the way it's usually translated is born of. So Yah, Mrs. is born of And it's the same concept in certain terms of offspring. So born of the moon, in this case, born of the sun, in that case. Jehuti-Mes is born of the deity Jehuti, who is also associated with the moon. So when people are talking about Yah, or Yahweh, or Yah, anything in terms of their deity, what they're talking about is this was the major deity of the moon at the time that the Hyksos were expelled. So when they're talking about Yah or Yahweh or anything dealing with Yah, basically they are giving you a clue in terms of when they were expelled. They've still retained the name of that major deity, and that was the deity that, and it's something that you find if you have a group of invaders and they are appealing to Seth as, you know, their major deity, storm deity, so forth and so on. And Hatshepsut said that the Hyksos, they ruled without Ra, right? You can picture those who stay in the dark all the time, they are very light, right? So if you rule with Ra, you better be jet black. So she would say that they've ruled without Ra. Now, if these people are here and they're appealing to Seth, one of the ways that you find, and this is in a book by Toby Wilkinson, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, and it's probably one of the most comprehensive accounts. It goes from the very beginning. It's not written by Africans, so you always have to be very cognizant of who the author is, but in terms of comprehensive from beginning all the way to end, it gives all the major things that you need to know about. And then when you want the real stuff, then you can go to our own scholars, our own Obenga. But for this, what they would often do is, if you're appealing to Seth, then I will make even more sacrifices to Seth than you are making and use your own deity against you to expel you. If you are not dealing with Ra and you're dealing with the moon, then the ruler's name is now Yamos, and the idea is propitiating the moon even more than you're propitiating, and even naming myself that Yamos Nefertari is the wife, right? So again, this was a concept.
So then Amun is basically Yamun?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Ea, so that's the moon deity. Let's show you what that is here. In Jasesh. And again, the dictionary was produced before some of these glyphs came into Jasesh, but this is the crescent moon. I'll send to the signs. Right? So this is Ea, the moon deity. And then just the moon, you can get it like this. And what we're doing, going through this information, is basically building up your immune system. So now people can't run lies on you, run game on you. Oh, you're the original Hebrews, or you're the original Israelites. Now you can actually say, what's the very first time there was anything called in Israel? And did I start there? I'm black. Land of black people, right? So what were black people doing the last 2,000 years before that? Before even going into what we're doing 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. That's like saying, you know, if you're in your 40s or 50s, say, oh, you were born last month. It's like having amnesia and saying that you're from something that just started last month. You know, no, I remember the 70s pretty well. It's like, no, you are from last month. So the major point in time where you find African people, so first we know global African presence. You have, on the scale of thousands and thousands of years, African people went out and populated the entire earth. But over the past many thousands of years, these Eurasians kept encroaching on Southwestern Asia. At the time of Kemet, they were very clear, and you saw this in the mural of what they call the mural of the races that Job often showed. That showed what the Asiatics look like, the so-called, exactly. So at the time of Kemet, you have this incursion that's already there. So originally black people were there, but you already had this invasion, and we're telling you, we know what these different folks look like, right? So now these folks keep trying to come into Kemet, and we build walls to keep them out. They come in, we expel them, right? So once we expel them, they are on their spot. We're not trying to go in there. But when they finally came into Kemet and conquered Kemet, that's where we started to go in there. And that's where you again have a major African presence there, which are these are now, we're keeping them on lock. So you have all these wars, Ramesses, so forth, Jehotimes, all these wars going into Southwestern Asia. So if you're talking about black people who are there in Israel, it's not that, okay, that's where we originated, that's where we started, because you're saying you only started 3,000 years ago, if you say that, which is so ahistorical, it's ridiculous, right? And you have black people in various places, but the place where we came from, you have to look at where Kemet, the African and Kemet said that they came from. And you have the, let me actually pull this up.
And this book about the Jews, the origin, what was the name of that one book you mentioned?
Let's come back up. This is Bitter Lives, Israel in and Out of Egypt. It's Carol Redmount, and the book is The Oxford History of the Biblical World. Redmount.
Like 2001.
First edition, 98. There's another stela called the Famine Stela in the Meta-Nature Study Group of Detroit, which is part of ASCAC. They put together a animated version of the entire story, which is a very good teaching, so I showed it to my children. And in it, basically the idea is here you have a 7-year famine, and it's set during the time of Joseph, whose name was also Necheriket, which is divine of body. And there's a famine, and he has to go send Imhotep to the source of the Nile to find out why it's not flooding. And he goes to the source of the Nile, and he says that sacrifices have not been made to Khnum, which is the creator deity, and because of that, that's why the Nile isn't flooding. So he gets all the rituals, they do the rituals, and then the Nile starts flooding again. But the significant part is this: it talks about the place from where the ancestors had come. So the Famine Stela, and this is the relevant part, this is what it looks like, and this is the relevant part. He departed, he returned to me quickly. He let me know the flow of Hapi, his shores and all the things they contain. He disclosed to me the hidden wonders to which the ancestors had made their way. So this is talking about, we're looking for the source of Hapi. That's the Nile River is called initially Hapi. So when you're going to the source, you're talking about the place of the ancestors, the predecessors, where did they come from? This is the source of the Nile. And no king had equaled them since. He said to me, there is a town in the midst of the deep, surrounded by Hapi, Yebud by name, this is what they call Abydos. It is first of the first known to Wawat. Wawat is one of the nomes of Nubia, and saying this is the very first known to Wawat. Earthly elevation, celestial hill, seat of Re when he prepares to give life to every face. His temple's name is Joy of Life. Twin caverns is the water's name. They are the breasts that nourish all. So we're talking about twin caverns. Well, a lot of the Eurasian Egyptologists say it's talking about right there in Abydos. They just believe that the Nile came out of just nowhere from underground and flowed there. But when it's saying twin caverns, other scholars have made the point that we know that there's the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and they meet around Khartoum area. So it's saying that he's going to the place from where the ancestors of Kemet came from, and this place is the first of the firsts, the very first nome of Wawat in Nubia, and it's called the Twin Caverns, and these are the breasts that nourish all. And if you see Hapi in the iconography, it's also often depicted as having very full, large breasts. So the breasts are metaphorically like these twin caverns that come together and then, nourish the land. So all of these texts put together are very telling to anybody who, is interested in actually learning what it is. Of course, Eurasians always say, no, they're just very dark-skinned white people. Oh no, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean this, and blah, 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 blah. But that's why we listen to the voice of the ancestors without Eurasian interpreters. Just I just want to know what my ancestors said about it. Finish. Right? And this is actually from, and you can see this on a BB to Mikasa. I gave a talk called Why Kemet Matters, where we went through about 125 slides going into the background, genetics, and then various contributions.
And is it correct to say that one of the problems here was that heretofore, the Europeans would just make declarative statements as fact? They would just arbitrarily say, this is true.
Right.
No substance, no substantiation, no documentation, just this is true.
Right.
And so as Africans began to go back and cite the documents and the evidence and the ancient record, that's what you're up against. You're up against the declarative versus the actual record, which is what you're pointing out. Hello, just trace the Nile on back to the White Nile and the Blue Nile? Why is that asking too much? Versus people who just said, oh, it just came from something. Or like they said, Mars is hot because it's red. Black people are 2/3 of a person. We didn't do any research, but we're just gonna say it.
3/5.
3/5. Yeah, thank you. I keep saying 2/3. But it's that's what we're up against. So with the same thing of the Israelite question, it's anything that's based on factual. It's just simple sheer hearsay. This is what I heard. This is what's said. Because you won't find any factual data supporting it. Just hearsay being repeated in the literature.
This is what happened. So there's a brother, Kamal Makesi Tehuti, and he has a book, How to Make a Negro Christian. And in it, he talks about how initially under Catholicism, the idea was that if you are made a Christian, you have to be set free automatically, right? So the papal bull is to reduce to servitude all infidel people. But if you're not an infidel, that's even going beyond how problematic even that term is. But even under that definition, if you have become Christian, you can't be enslaved anymore. So the innovation was that, you know what we can do is that we can make them Christian, say we freed them spiritually, even though we've kept them in bondage physically. Like, wow, this is a great idea. So this is what they call the so-called Great Awakening, which is before that African people were root doctors. They were doing, this is in the US, in places like this. Everybody was still doing the African spirituality. If you look at the Stoner Rebellion, they were beating drums. They were doing drum language to alert other people that we're about to have a rebellion. So we were very much entrenched in African spirituality. But then they had this idea of, we can say that we freed them spiritually, and that they can be free in the by and by, in the hereafter, pie in the sky, swing low, sweet chariot, even though we've kept them in physical bondage. And this is, I'll come back to that point, but this is even my problem now when people say, oh, we need to be free mentally. Oh, if only we can, break yourself from mental slavery. It's like, well, what about the physical one? What about everything you wear? What about everything you eat? What about everything you depend on? And we're just saying, let's just focus on this. I'm like, this is the exact same thing that got us into this in the first place, this split between mind and body, which is at the root of both of those things. So let's go back to the Great Awakening. So after this guy, Charles Colcock Jones, came up with this idea, that's where you had the mass evangelization of African people, and they have access to the Bible and so forth and so on. Now, what black people were trying to do is, all right, here I have this book. Everything of value was taken from me, but you gave me this fancy toilet paper called the Bible. So what I'm going to do is try to find myself in it. If I'm enslaved, let me try to find someone in here who's enslaved. If I want to get out of slavery, now let me find people who got out of slavery. So now this is where we're coming back to Israel. You have the lies that the Hyksos came as invaders and were driven out with their tails between their legs. But that story, this is the first spin job of propaganda. That story doesn't sound so good that I got my butt whooped. So let's say that I had a righteous redemption, right? That I was enslaved, but I got free because I'm the chosen people, right? So that's not what the historical record says. That's not what the archaeological record says. People are still wasting millions trying to find these chariots in the Red Sea, which they're never ever going to find. It's like trying to track Santa Claus on Christmas Eve, right? You're wasting your money on radar because you're not going to find it. So But again, this is the motivation for African people. They're given the Bible, they're trying to find themselves in it. And that's exactly what they did, because if you look at Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, all of them were preachers, and they preached this fire and brimstone like, yo, just like they got free, we're about to whoop these white folks, and that's exactly what they did. So if that's all you have, it's like two turntables and a mic. If all you got is 2 turntables and a mic, then you create hip-hop. Whatever you have, then that's what you're going to use to try to free yourself. But imagine if that's not all you have. So look at Haiti. They have Vodun. So they didn't have to try to find themselves in a biblical story. But the Bible, that us being saddled with this thing, at that point in time, it was something that was a bridge, right, to freedom. Something that at that time was progressive. But now think about this time, right? That was a tool that they were using to keep us enslaved here, but say, oh, in the by and by, you're going to be free in the next life. So just worry about that thing, right? That was a tool for oppression, but we tried to flip it. But again, coming back to contemporary times, why are we still doing that? In that sense, it's like,
Why are y'all still on the bridge?
exactly, you've built your house on the bridge.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you keep it moving. It's like, no, keep it moving. You were just there because, you know, you're trying to get somewhere. But you actually forgot your destination and said the bridge is the end all and be all. Let's just stay on the bridge forever, right? So you can find this with the people who are in the Hebrew Israelites, the people who are in the Moors, people who are in the Nation of Islam, all these other things. All those were bridges saying we're going to try to get to freedom. But again, just like how we gave this, you know, you can look at it as tiers and say that's better than using Christianity to stay completely enslaved. But that's not where we're going to. We're trying to get to, this is originated by African people and it's beneficial to African people in all these different areas. And you can quantify it, calculate it as much as possible. And some of the easiest ones to demonstrate this too is in areas of economics. Other ones that are more difficult slightly to demonstrate is in psychology. How is this picture of this white boy, Caesar Borgia, what does that do to your mentality, right? Again, you can look at the oldest pictures of the so-called Jesus and it's still black because it's plagiarized from Heru. What else would it be, right? But any thoughts on these subjects? Because it's a study group, I think it's good to bring these in so it's not only we're learning the technical things, this is how to write it, but why is it significant? How does it relate to Africa and African people, right?
No, I think my question just had to do, and I think you answered it in one of the books, with the confusion around how Africans begin to describe themselves as Hebrew Israelites or Hebrews. When, as you said, prior to that, in common sense would say, okay, well, that's not what we started out with, so how did that even come in the mix anyway? What were we before that?
Exactly.
And one of the books is The Bitter Lives, Israel in and Out of Egypt. What other reference can we have to something about the origin of the Jews? Someone told me years ago about 2 or 3 books specifically on that and how they invented themselves, them being the Europeans. But I totally don't remember the titles.
What is this? You can look at Dr. Ben, We the Black Jews.
Okay.
You can look at, what is it? I want to say 12 Tribes of Israel. Actually, I have internet for me. I'm trying to find it.
Yeah. And We the Black Jews, this talks about how they come to call themselves that or how they substantiate themselves as such.
So basically it's talking about the Ethiopian situation.
The Ethiopian situation.
Right.
Okay.
But again, however far back you go, you have to ask yourself the fundamental question of what were we doing before that? And this is, you know, when people, especially Rastafarians, say, okay, well, Christianity, you know, the foundation, all these aspects were in Africa. It's like, well, what were you doing before that? And once you look at the actual text, then you see that everything that is significant in Christianity was written thousands of years before there was anything called a Christianity, right? And to give the parable that Dr. Ben used to say, he says, imagine if I make a feast, a sumptuous feast, and everybody comes to partake of my feast, then they go back to their lands and they vomit it up. Now me and my depraved state, they bring the vomit back to me, And here I am trying to sift through the spices and say, oh, this is, I think I taste African spice. Is that dawa dawa? Right? This is what we're dealing with. We're still trying to sift through vomit as opposed to saying, let's go back to the garden. Right? Let's go read the recipes that our ancestors carved in stone. How about that? Right? So, you know, we get bogged down in all this insanity, and it keeps us, the thing that ends up, that starts off being a bridge, it ends up being, I don't know what to call it, a blockage, right? That prevents us from actually learning the original information in favor of, you know, keeping this thing on. I'm trying to change this. And it's sort of like when you think about the Hebrew Israelites now, many of them are in Israel fighting on behalf of the Zionists against Palestine, right? Whereas here we have two enemies of African people fighting against each other. What is your, you know, in Yoruba say Talokwel, who called you, right? So you have both of these in ancient times and contemporary times, these Arabs and these, you know, other Eurasians are fighting against each other. But because they handed you a Bible a couple hundred years ago, and you don't know the history of how that Bible got into your hands, or the Council of Nicaea, or any of this other stuff, Constantine, we don't know about Alexander the Sixth and Caesar Borgia, and that's the image that we have. Because we don't know any of that information, we end up saying, okay, well, I'm on the side of the Hebrews, I'm the chosen people. And it's like, that's not your fight.
And what pieces of literature kind of talks about that? For instance, the Nicene Council.
Yeah, there's a book called History of the First Council of Nicaea. And this is, I think, the PDF of that.
You said? Ray Higgins? Okay.
So look this up, and I think the PDFs, you can find the book, PDF book online. The History of the First Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. And again, none of this information is secret, because you know John Jackson was dealing with this way back in the early 1900s, amongst others. Percy Graves, a whole bunch of others. 16 Crucified Saviors, Christianity Before Christ.
Yeah, that's the one I heard of, Christianity.
That's John Jackson. "16 Crucified Saviors." This is it. The World's 16 Crucified Saviors.
Okay. Never heard of that.
That's Percy Graves. And this is the late 1800s, I want to say that this was written.
Wow.
The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, or Christianity Before Christ. Yes, 1875.
That's when it was written?
Yes. So none of this is new information.
And it's by...
Percy Graves.
What is that spelled? Or is it-
Kerseygraves. Which asserts that Jesus was not an actual person but a creation largely based on earlier stories of deities or God-men saviors who have been crucified and descended to and ascended from the underworld, which is just the sun. What the sun does every year, goes down, goes up, goes down. This is why Christmas, Easter, all these are just talking about what the sun is doing, right? Everybody's looking at the same sky, so everybody has the same story. It's not, this isn't difficult. And then even the earliest pictures of a so-called Jesus were still black. And I want to say this is in what we now call Egypt.
And as Honorable Rashid pointed out to us, and it's also throughout Europe.
Yes, yes.
All those jet black figures. Yeah.
Here we go. Earliest known image of Jesus from the Coptic church that should be in modern day so-called Egypt. we go. And Renoko uses this in some of his slideshows. Circa 100 to 400 AD Roman catacombs. No, there's one. Let me see. Let's go back.
Is that a book or an article?
That's a pop-up. That's not what I was trying to get to. The left-hand side is the one in Egypt before the Roman catacombs on the far left. There we go. This is it.
Yeah, that's how the Ethiopians draw theirs. That looks like their art.
It's interesting. I went to Addis Ababa, and in the palace, the royal palace, all of the images of Jesus and Mary look very, very white.
Like
Yes, and I can actually show
in
you.
the palace.
Yeah, matter of fact, and then Haile Selassie had a picture of Jesus, and it looks just like the Caesar Borgia one. That's in his personal bedroom. Let me show you those. This is from my own photos collection. And the images, you know, when you go to places similarly in Kemet, they don't allow you to take flash photos because it degrades the quality of the image. But you can still see very, very clearly. And when we ask them, why is that? Why are all the images white? Because, you know, we've all seen the other ones, but this is a royal collection, and they pride themselves on how old all these images are. They said, oh, well, the first apostles that came to us, and they mentioned some of them, it just sounded like regular white folks' names. They came from Greece and these other places, so the first apostles, we decided to depict them like those. But let me show you so you can actually see what I'm talking about. There we go. This was when I shared it with some brothers who are Rastas, and they did not like it. So look at this image here. I don't know how well you can see it.
Yeah, we've seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
You seen that one?
Oh, very much.
This is Haile Selassie's personal picture that he got down on his knees. So people say that he is the, and this is the thing, even when you're talking about Rastafarianism, it's based on the Bible.
Yeah, it is.
So before you can even say Haile Selassie has any significance, you have to first accept Ethiopia stretches her arms forth, hands forth, whatever. You have to accept that there was a death and resurrection because there had to be an original fall, because there had to be a Garden of Eden and a sin, an original sin, and an Eve who did such and such. You have to have so many false premises to even get to this person is now significant. You can see at the time of Marcus Garvey saying, all right, look, we can look in the Bible and we're going to make it. That's progressive. Yeah, we're going to make it. We even got something that says so. But now in this day and age, we can see how that can very clearly outlive its usefulness. So this is very recent. Let me show you some of the ones from the old ancient collection that they don't allow you to take images of. Flash photos of. And this is the thing, primary documentation, because otherwise folks will run game on you all day long. I say, I'm taking my own pictures. How about that? And after this, we'll get to writing some middle nature, which is what we're actually here for. But again, all this is, of course, very significant to build our immune system against insanity.
I think it's a little bit.
Yeah, it's just taking a while. Let me see. I may have this on my external too, which would be good if I do. So I went there in 2015 for a conference, but conferences are just excuses to do the real work. I went to Kim and I was like, shoot, you think I'm just gonna stay up in your conference? I missed the first 2 days of a 3-day conference. I was like, yo, I'm sorry, y'all. I was supposed to get back there earlier, but they were like, all right, you have a choice of going to Abu Simbel, that's the huge temple of Ramesses II, or you can go to the conference. I was like, shoot.
That's not even a.
I was like, y'all,
$200.
y'all stupid. You think I ain't gonna go? Now this is all Kemet. I have it on my other one, so we just gotta wait for this to load. It looks like it's coming quicker now. So this is Empress Benin. So now we're coming to some of their pink looking folks. You have some, this one doesn't look too black. You have some that look reasonably tan, but these ones do not look reasonably tan. All these pink folks. This is the one they love, this one here. He ain't looking too black to me. But then Haile Selassie ain't looking too black to me either. So this is the main one that I sent around. Look at that. All right, and you know, look at the age of it. You can't take flash, you know, with this. And this is what they pat themselves on the back. This shows how old Christianity is here. Look at the images that we have going back so old, so ancient. And these are the ones you see. So outside of the palace, actually now, if you sit in the equivalent of the trotros and taxis, you find more of the modern, same thing you see in Ghana, all these white Jesus images. White man, whiter than anything you ever want to see a day in your life. So white and scary. But I know the ones that we talk about when we say, oh, we see the Ethiopian ones, but this is the royal collection. This is a royal collection. You can see some of this stuff falling apart even. And it makes you think, what does the royalty have in their heads? This is the very first place in Africa to be colonized. None of that looks black, right? So if you have people praying to Haile Selassie, then you got to ask yourself, who is Haile Selassie praying to? Now look at this brother. He look black. But that ain't what we seeing in the images. And this is proof that I actually went there. And this is one of the cannons that Emperor Menelik used to whoop the crap out of these Italians. Defeated the Roman Empire again. But you have victory, and then you have victory. You have defeat, then you have defeat. So you can have a military victory, but a spiritual defeat, right? Because if you can't show me what you were doing before all this, and this was one of my former students.